I still recall the day we boarded the flight to Bora Bora, excitement bubbling within me. It was our honeymoon, the beginning of what I believed would be a lifelong journey. Helen, my wife, looked stunning, her smile illuminating the cabin as we settled into our seats. Little did I know that trip would alter everything. When we arrived at the resort, it felt like stepping into a dream. The water was so clear it looked unreal. The bungalows were opulent, and the staff welcomed us with genuine warmth. Helen appeared ecstatic, snapping photos and holding my hand as we explored. I was blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. The first few days were idyllic. We swam, snorkeled, and savored cocktails by the beach. Each evening, we dined under a canopy of stars, talking about our plans for the future. But then, something changed. On the fourth night, I noticed Helen acting differently. After dinner, she suggested we join a group at the resort's bar. "Let's go, Justin," she said, her eyes gleaming with a blend of excitement and mischief. "It'll be fun." I wasn't thrilled by the idea. "Helen, it's our honeymoon. Why not enjoy a quiet night together?" She pouted. "Come on, it's just one night. We've been together all day. I just want to meet some new people." Reluctantly, I agreed. The bar was buzzing, filled with couples and travelers. Helen thrived in the lively atmosphere, laughing and chatting with strangers. Meanwhile, I felt like a fish out of water. That's when I saw him, Dave. He was tall, with bronze skin and an effortless smile. He caught Helen's attention almost instantly. They started talking, and I found myself sidelined, sipping my drink in silence. After a while, I decided to call it a night. "Helen, I'm heading back to the room. Are you coming?" She hesitated. "You go ahead. I'll be right behind you." I frowned, but didn't press the issue. "All right, don't stay too long." As I walked back to our bungalow, an uneasy feeling crept into my chest. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself I was overthinking. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The next morning, Helen was unusually quiet. She sat across from me at breakfast, absent-mindedly pushing food around her plate. When I asked if she was okay, she brushed it off. "Just tired," she said, avoiding eye contact. "Tired?" I asked, trying to meet her gaze. "You went to bed early last night." "Yeah, I guess the heat is getting to me," she murmured, still not looking up. Her hands trembled slightly as she sipped her coffee, but I pretended not to notice. I wanted to believe her, to attribute her behavior to the long days in the sun. Yet, her usual warmth had been replaced by a distant coolness I couldn't ignore. That evening, Helen suggested going to the bar again. This time, I refused. "Helen, why are you so set on going there? It's our honeymoon." She shrugged. "It's fun. You don't have to come if you don't want to." Her nonchalant attitude made my chest tighten. "It's not that I don't want to," I said. "I just feel like you're more interested in the bar than in spending time with me." She turned to me looking both irritated and detached in a way I couldn't fully comprehend. "Justin, I like being there. It helps me unwind. If you don't want to come, that's fine, but I'm going." She grabbed her purse and walked out without waiting for my response. The uneasy feeling I'd been suppressing all day resurfaced with force. Helen had never preferred strangers over me, especially not during such a special trip. I decided to follow her without her knowing. A few minutes later, I slipped out of the bungalow and headed toward the bar. The path was dimly lit, and as I approached, the sound of laughter and music grew louder. My heart raced with every step, a mix of fear and dread gripping me. At the bar, I stayed in the shadows, scanning the crowd. It didn't take long to spot them. Helen and Dave were seated at a small corner table, their heads close together in deep conversation. Helen's face glowed as she spoke, her smile brighter than it had been all day. My chest tightened. It wasn't just their proximity, it was the way they looked at each other. Dave leaned in casually, as though sharing a secret. Helen's eyes sparkled under the dim lights, and she laughed softly. The kind of laugh that used to be meant for me. I stood there for a long time, watching them. My heart pounded as I braced for something worse, but nothing happened beyond talking and laughing. They stayed at the table, enjoying each other's company. No touches, no whispers that I could see. Still, it hurt. Helen seemed so happy, so at ease with him. Eventually, they stood and Helen headed back to the bungalow alone. I stayed behind, taking time to collect my thoughts. After about 15 minutes, I returned. When I walked in, Helen was already in bed scrolling through her phone. She glanced up casually. "Where were you?" she asked. "I went to the restaurant for a quick bite," I replied, keeping my voice even. She nodded, not questioning further. I let the conversation drop, though my mind was racing with questions and doubts. The next morning, I couldn't hold back any longer. After breakfast, I confronted her. "Helen, what's going on? Why are you spending so much time with Dave?" She froze, her face paling. "Justin, it's nothing," she said quickly, too quickly. "He's just a friend." "Just a friend?" I snapped, unable to hide my frustration. "You've been spending more time with him than with me." Her eyes darted away, and she crossed her arms defensively. "You're imagining things," she said. "I love you, Justin. I married you." Her words rang hollow, and I couldn't shake the feeling she wasn't telling me everything. Doubt had already taken hold. That night, I lay awake, unable to sleep. Helen was beside me, her back turned, and I felt like a stranger in my own marriage. The final straw came 2 nights later. Helen went to the bar again, and once more I followed her. This time, I saw them slipping away toward the beach. I trailed them from a distance, my heart pounding with every step. The moonlight shimmered on the water, casting shadows on their faces. They seemed completely comfortable, laughing and talking like close friends. But what unsettled me most was how near they were, their arms brushing as they walked, as though they were a couple. Then, without warning, they stopped. Dave turned to Helen, his hand gently touching her face. She didn't pull away. They stood there, their eyes locked with an intensity I didn't want to understand. And then, to my horror, they kissed. It wasn't a quick, innocent peck. It was deep, lingering, and everything a kiss between a husband and wife should be. I stood frozen, my stomach in knots. My wife, my new wife, was kissing another man. I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. My mind spun, my heart shattered. After the kiss, they broke apart and began walking back toward the beach path. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. All I knew was that I had to keep following them. I needed to know where this would lead. They kept walking until they reached Dave's bungalow. I quickly took out my phone and began recording. I captured them embracing, his arms wrapped tightly around her, followed by another kiss before they entered the bungalow together. I couldn't believe my eyes. My wife, the woman I had just married days ago, was betraying me, on our honeymoon no less. I stood there for a few moments, my mind spinning before finally turning away. Each step back to my bungalow felt heavier than the last. Once inside, I sat at the desk, staring at the screen of my phone. My thoughts raced as I tried to figure out what to do next. Confronting her now seemed pointless. She had already shown me who she truly was. I booked a flight home for the next morning. It wasn't easy, but I knew I couldn't stay here any longer, not after what had happened. Then, I canceled Helen's return ticket. She wouldn't be going home with me anymore. Finally, I logged into our shared bank account. It had always been a joint account, but now it was mine. I transferred all the funds into my personal account, ensuring she couldn't access it. Leaning back in the chair, I stared at the ceiling. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to salvage. My marriage was over before it had even begun. About 2 hours later, Helen returned to the bungalow. I stayed in bed pretending everything was normal, though my heart was still racing from what I had witnessed. Her footsteps were light but quick, as though she hadn't expected me to be awake. "Hey," she said, sounding slightly surprised. I gave her a neutral nod. "How was your night?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though it was hard to mask the bitterness creeping into my tone. "Did you have fun?" "Yeah," she replied quickly, almost too quickly. "It was fine. I met a few couples from Canada. We just talked and hung out for a bit." I nodded as she set her purse on the dresser and began undressing to take a shower. She avoided eye contact, clearly unwilling to have a meaningful conversation. "I'm tired," she said, turning toward the bathroom. "I'm going to shower and head to bed." I stayed where I was, keeping up the act of being unfazed, even though every part of me wanted to explode. She was acting as though nothing had happened, and I couldn't decide if that made me angrier or sadder. She didn't look back as she disappeared into the bathroom. I lay there in the silence, waiting for the inevitable confrontation or perhaps the inevitable end. The next morning, Helen went to the pool as though nothing had happened. I stayed behind, quietly packing my belongings. I didn't say a word to her. Once I was done, I handed in the room key at reception and left the hotel. A taxi took me to the airport. My heart was heavy, but my resolve was firm. The flight home was quiet, a strange calm settling over me. When I arrived, it was late, and I barely had time to sit down before my phone began ringing incessantly. Missed calls and messages flooded in, all from Helen. I ignored the first few, but she called again, and I reluctantly picked up. "Where are you?" Her voice was frantic, laced with panic as though she had just realized something was wrong. "Home," I said flatly. There was silence on the other end before she spoke again. "What do you mean, home? Why did you leave?" I didn't answer immediately. My mind raced, and the anger that had been simmering finally erupted. "You really don't know why?" I asked, my voice sharp. "You've made your choice, Helen." "What are you talking about?" she asked, desperation creeping into her tone. "You're just going to leave me like this? After everything?" "After everything?" I scoffed, my voice rising. "You've been with another man, Helen. On our honeymoon." I saw it all. Her breath hitched on the other end. She started, but I cut her off. "You've been lying to me," I said, my tone hardening. "I'm done. There's nothing left to say. Oh, and by the way, I canceled your return flight. You're on your own now." I ended the call before she could respond. My chest was tight, and while confronting her brought some relief, it still felt surreal. The life I thought I had, the woman I thought I knew, it was all gone. Later, I received a text from Helen saying she'd be home the next day and wanted to talk. I didn't bother replying. The thought of her returning to my house after what she'd done made my blood boil. I grabbed my tools and changed the locks, ensuring she wouldn't be able to get inside. Then, I packed up her belongings, clothes, toiletries, everything, and moved them to the front yard. I didn't care if it seemed harsh. She had shattered everything, and this was my way of closing that chapter. The next day, she arrived. Through the window, I watched as she froze at the sight of her things scattered outside. She stood there for a moment before walking up to the door and trying to unlock it. When she realized the lock had been changed, panic set in. She knocked hard, shouting for me to let her in. After a few minutes, I opened the door, slowly. She stood there, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Let me in, Justin," she demanded, her voice trembling. "No," I said coldly. "I don't want you in my life anymore. Take your stuff from the yard, or I'll throw it all in the trash. It's taking up space." She stepped back, her face flushing with frustration. "You can't do this. You can't just throw me out like this. We need to talk." I shook my head. "There's nothing left to talk about. It's over." She opened her mouth to argue, but I had no interest in hearing it. Without another word, I closed the door in her face. The finality of the action lingered in the air. After that, I didn't waste any time. I filed for divorce and set everything in motion. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. But I wasn't done. I sent the video, the one of her kissing Dave and entering his bungalow, to her parents and close friends. They deserved to know the truth about who she was. The calls and messages flooded in, but I ignored them all. There was no going back. That was the end. The woman I thought I knew, the life I thought we were building. It was all over. With that, I could finally begin to move forward, ready to face whatever the future held.